Now you talk about terror. I've been terrorized all my day. All my day.
Hi, I'm Chris Hedges. Welcome to Days of Revolt. In today's segment, filmed in New York City, we're going to discuss the animal agriculture industry and its effects on climate change and global warming, which rival that of the fossil fuel industry if it doesn't outstrip it. And with me to discuss this issue are the co-directors of the film Cowspiracy, which after I watched led me to become a vegan, Kip Anderson and Keegan Kuhn. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I think we'll open this segment by showing the trailer of your film, and then we can begin to discuss what you focused on within the documentary.
Do you think there should be any concern of us making this documentary?
Of course. If you don't realize right now that you're putting your neck on the chopping block, you know, you better take that camera and throw it away.
It's an environmental disaster that's being ignored by the very people who should be championing.
Let's look at the fundamental problem here.
No one wants to talk about it.
Because they're membership organizations, you know, a lot of them. They're looking to maximize the number of people making contributions.
The leading cause of environmental degradation is...
And we need to address that as well.
It's not up to the Department of Water Resources.
Hard to actually target like one thing.
I don't necessarily know what it is.
There's suppression and mismanagement of information everywhere. It abounds.
It starts at the local level, but then it goes all the way to Congress.
When you consider the devastation it's having on our planet as well as the oceans.
And we're in the middle of the largest mass extinction of species in 65 million years.
They can dictate the federal policies because they have so much political power.
They're one of the largest industries on the planet with the biggest environmental impact, trying to keep us in the dark about how it's operating.
That's the one thing no one talks about. Everybody goes around that.
Unfortunately, we are no longer able to fund your film project. We had a meeting, and due to the growing controversial subject matter, we have some concerns that have to go out.
You're going up against people that have massive legal resources, and you have nothing.
A lot of people just keep their mouths shut because they don't want to be the next one with the bullet to their head.
I don't know that I would want to comment on that.
So in the film, you unravel it as a kind of process of discovery, which I think works very effectively. And maybe you can describe the steps by which you begin to question not only the role of the animal agriculture industry, but the immense silence about this role, even within environmental groups.
I was really finding the discovery, first finding out a post about the UN expressing a study that showed that animal agriculture, raising animals for food, was a leading cause of greenhouse gases. And when you compare it to totaling all transportation up together, cars, trains, automobiles, planes, everything, that still did not match the impact that raising animals for food did. It was around 18%, 13%, and as you see later in the film, there's different numbers that go all the way up to 51%. That number varies depending on how the calculations are done. But once I found that out, it kind of became a domino effect. I said, well, what else is happening? And then found out not only is the leading cause of greenhouse gases, but it's also a leading cause of soil depletion, water pollution, water consumption, rainforest destruction, land use, species extinction, and the list goes on and on and on.
Well, let's break it down. Let's talk about how the industry functions in terms of exploiting natural resources and, as you point out, poisoning natural resources, whether it's these huge factory farms or the rainforest. Give me some kind of examples of, statistics that illustrate the extent of the devastation.
Yeah, I mean, the livestock industry's own admission, 45% of all land use in the world, ice-free land, is used for animal agriculture, raising animals for food or raising the feed crops that are fed to those animals. So just that alone, it's the largest land use of any industry.
And we should add that this is largely contributing to the destruction of the rainforest as they rip down the rainforest to grow primarily as it's soy in order to feed livestock.
Absolutely. Leading cause of rainforest destruction, leading cause of deforestation around the world is for raising animals for food. And yes, the rainforest, the Amazonian rainforest, 91% of all Amazon destruction in Brazil is caused from animal agriculture, and that's either to clear forest to grow grass to feed the animals or to grow genetically engineered corn and soybean, which are then fed to the livestock. And then it's not just, South Americans eating beef. This is corn and soybean is then exported to Europe to feed livestock in Europe. So this is destruction that's happening around the globe. It's by far the most destructive industry on the planet today.
Talk a little bit about one of the things I thought you did quite a good job of in the film, and you also subsequently, working with my wife, Eunice Wong, wrote a book, The Sustainability Secret. But I thought you did a very good job of explaining the input, the input in terms of resources into, for instance, producing a gallon of milk or a pound of beef, as well as the consequences. We'll talk a little bit about methane and stuff later, but talk a little bit about the cost of sustaining an industry that centers a diet around the consumption of meat.
The impact and the footprint of these products is massive. I mean, you just look at a pound of beef takes anywhere from 2,500 gallons to 8,000 gallons of water to produce. A gallon of milk takes up over 1,000 gallons of water to produce. I mean, 56% of all water consumed in the United States goes into animal agriculture versus 4% for domestic use. So the footprint of these products is massive.
And yet you have a drought in California. And it's never mentioned.
And that's when, in relation to, you put it in common day terms, eating one single hamburger is equivalent of 660 gallons of water. It's equivalent, eating one hamburger is equivalent of showering or not showering for 2 entire months. Yet we're in California, there's a drought issue, and they're putting fines on people sprinkling water on their lawns, yet doing nothing about the people's diet, which is, it's only 5% domestic. All domestic water consumption is 5% versus 55% animal agriculture. So anything we do at home, short showers, turning off your faucet, brushing your teeth, is negligent compared to just a single day of eating these products.
Let's talk a little bit about ag-gag laws, which are very draconian. And then let's talk a little bit about the big environmental groups, which have remained muzzled on this issue, which is something that I think you do a very good job of calling them out on, both in the film and the book. But let's first talk, if you can explain how these ag-gag laws work and what they've done.
Yeah, so ag-gag laws are laws that have been passed in about 13 different states in the United States that silence dissent against this industry. And they've made it a criminal act to expose the atrocities that the livestock industry commits against animals.
Am I correct in that in many cases it's considered a form of terrorism, or under terrorism laws? Is that
yeah, well, so there's ag-gag laws, which are state, which again make it illegal to document and expose the atrocities these farms are
This
committing.
is like sneaking into a large slaughterhouse and filming it. Right?
So it goes from all the way from being an undercover investigator to being on a public road and filming from public land into a private facility. There was actually a National Geographic photographer was arrested for doing aerial photography of a feedlot in Kansas. So those are state laws.
And what are the consequences? What do they do to you?
It's fines. It can be up to jail sentence as well. But we have federal laws. We have the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, which makes it is a felony and considered a terrorist activity for anyone who disrupts the business of an animal enterprise or interferes with the business of an animal enterprise. And these laws don't benefit consumers in any way.
Right. Well, of course, because if consumers saw, one of the things I remember, I can't remember whether it was the book or the film, but when they have chicken carcasses, a third of the water weight is fecal material, and that these chickens are in these big vats and they're dark with fecal waste, and the workers call it fecal soup. And if you look on the chicken package, it says that it includes, of course, it raises the price per pound, but essentially it's fecal waste and water that leaches into the chicken and then is treated with heavy antibiotics, right? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. And the majority, when they test these meat products, on one study, 100% of all meat, hamburger, all had fecal contamination.
Right.
Chicken had around 70%. So yeah, it's just, and that's the conditions they live in. And then these conditions, they leak out into streams, they leak out into these cesspools that are then sprayed onto farmlands that go into people's homes, into the streams, and we have huge ocean dead zones such as the Gulf of Mexico, and it just goes on and on.
Which is from the animal agriculture industry?
Yeah, mostly it's between the actual farms themselves, and it's also between all the pesticides that use to grow the corn and the soy that then go and leach in there.
Well, one of the reasons the ag laws I think are so severe, and this I think you do a good job of explaining, is because of the horrendous forms or conditions that animals are raised in. And perhaps you can describe a little bit about what those conditions are, for instance, with cattle.
Yeah, so for dairy cows, they spend, their dairy cow lives to be about 25 years normally, but in the dairy industry, they live to be about 4 years. And so they're continually impregnated against their will. As soon as they have the babies are taken away so that we can take their milk.
Or end up for veal.
Exactly.
If they're male calves.
All male calves, end up in the veal industry or slaughtered right then because they don't produce milk, so they're worthless to the dairy industry. And that's just the dairy industry. And then you have the egg industry, which 90% or more of all eggs are produced from battery hens, which are hens kept in cages so small they can't turn around or spread their wings. They are, again, slaughtered at about 2 years of age when they could have lived 10, 12, 15 years because this industry is all about productivity. It doesn't care about the animal's welfare, it doesn't care about the animal's well-being or their psychology. It's about producing as much as possible with as little.
Under horrendous conditions. I mean, they can't move. They will, especially with breeders, they can't even often walk. And disease is rampant.
That's it. I mean, 80% of all antibiotics sold in the United States go into animal agriculture because these animals live in such horrendous conditions. The only way to keep them alive is to feed them drugs.
Right. And they're essentially, tortured their entire life and then slaughtered.
I don't think it's an exaggeration at all to say that.
And that's why we have ag laws, because if people actually saw how their meat products were being produced, it would be so appalling that it would be very hard to consume these products.
That's exactly what we've seen happen. When investigators go into these facilities, they are exposing the atrocities, and there's consumer backlash. Consumers don't want to support an industry that is producing horrendous treatment to the animals.
Well, before we talk about organic farming, let's talk a little bit about the big environmental groups, which you begin your film by essentially going to these groups and asking them about animal agriculture.
But that was really the inspiration, actually, to the motivation to make the film was even more than all the atrocities that are happening from animal agriculture. It's the fact that when I went on these organizations' websites, the Greenpeace, the Sierra Club, that I supported my whole life, in particular Sierra Club, I used to support specifically the wolves, yet never even thought about why the wolves are becoming, they're decimated themselves and being shot down is because of this cattle industry. And once I found out they were not talking about this information, I started emailing them and calling them for months and actually years. And they did not want to talk about it at all. And it's so bizarre for them to cover up the #1 cause of destruction on every single thing that they're supposedly working towards sustaining. And it's a one-stop shop, yet they're completely ignoring this because it's essentially, quote-unquote, a win campaign.
Why?
Because people don't want to hear it. Greenpeace, we had a joke where it's more, they should be called Green Please, because they're more concerned with, getting more donorship, to getting more funding. And a lot of these groups on the board of directors, for example, NRDC, one of the main...
What's NRDC?
National Resources
Defense Council.
Defense Council. On their board of counselors, some of them are part of this industry. And so when you have the board of directors and they're not only part of the industry and there's some crossover, yet they're also consuming meat and dairy, they're part of the problem. So it's kind of like going to the American Lung Association and that the whole board of directors, they're sitting around smoking cigarettes.
Do you think the issue is because their contributors are eating meat, or because they're frightened of the animal agriculture industry, or both?
I personally think it's a combination of everything, but I'd say the lowest is a fear. I mean, we believe it's more a fear of them losing donors, and it's not, again, a win campaign, because they do have to spend millions of dollars on doing a campaign. But we kept asking them, why not just put it on the website? Just put this information on there. And we just think that they don't feel that their members will want to hear the truth of what is happening, because that affects them. It's easier to talk about some abstract concept like a dam that they'll never see, yet they can sign their name on it, something that I can do 3 times a day or not do.
Let's talk about organic farming, and that's also something that you explore in the film and in the book. And I think you implode this myth that somehow free-range or organic livestock is a solution.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the environmental organizations that do talk about animal agriculture, they'll talk about buying organic or free-range or local meat. And sadly, that's not a solution either. Free-range cows and pigs and chickens require vastly more land. So a factory farm cow needs about 2 acres of land to raise her to slaughter weight, versus a free-range cow, she needs 10 to 100 acres. So vastly more land that needs to be cleared of forest, needs to be cleared of wildlife, needs to be cleared of all native plant species to make room for a completely unnative species. Just that alone is a huge issue. There's been studies that show that actually grass-fed cows produce more methane than factory-farmed animals. But there's the wildlife issue is a huge part of it. When you clear land, I mean, right now we have more wild horses in federal holding facilities than we have free on the range. And the reason for that is cattle ranchers are grazing cattle on public lands, and they put pressure on the U.S. government to take the horses off because they compete with their cows. So grass-fed beef is not a solution. Free-range farming is not a solution. We have 7.2 billion people on the planet. There's no way we're going to feed the world with organic farms. We simply can't do it when it comes to animal agriculture.
Can you talk a little bit about statistically how the animal agriculture industry contributes to greenhouse gases?
Yeah, so according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, they did a study called the Livestock Long Shadow Report, and they said that 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions, human-caused greenhouse gases, come from animal agriculture, raising animals for food, which is more than the whole transportation industry, 13% for that. But then there's 2 environmental advisors to the World Bank who did their own analysis and used the global standard for measuring greenhouse gases. And they found that actually 51% of all greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture. And that's because we have to take into consideration the loss of carbon sinks. When you destroy rainforest to raise cattle, you're losing that ability of that ecosystem to store carbon. Take into consider respiration. We're exceeding the bio capacity of the planet by a magnitude of 7. So you have to take into consider things like respiration. You have to measure methane at its proper level, which is methane gas is 86 times more powerful at trapping heat than CO2 on a 20-year time frame. We don't have 100 years to deal with climate change. We have 10, 15, 20 years at best.
Right.
So we have to be talking about the short-lived, potent greenhouse gases. So when you take all those things into consideration, it's 51% or more of all human-caused greenhouse gases come from animal agriculture.
And I think one of the things you raise is that if people switch to a vegan diet, it takes far less cultivation on the land, that you are actually reclaiming huge sections of the earth, especially in the rainforest that are kind of the lungs of the planet. If you switch to a vegan diet, or if we were vegan, what would cultivation look like? I mean, statistically, you can feed yourself on a much smaller imprint.
And the equivalent between just a vegan and a vegetarian, it's 6 times more land?
Yeah, so it's 3 times more land to produce the food needed. So a vegan takes about 1/6 of an acre. A vegetarian takes 3 times as much. And
1/6 of an acre?
For an entire year to grow all the food you need.
Oh, really?
For 1/6 of an acre. And that's a global standard. So that takes in consideration poor soil qualities and on and on.
Right.
It takes 18 times more land to feed an American omnivore. 1 acre of land, you can grow a cow and produce 300 pounds of meat, or you can grow vegetables on that and produce 36,000 pounds of edible plant protein right there. So just the footprint alone. I mean, right now we have less than an acre of farmable land per person on the planet. average American takes an acre to an acre and a half to feed them every single year. So we simply don't have enough land on the planet to feed everybody the way Americans are eating. We have.
And a lot of people think it's a population issue, but the main thing is it's what the population is doing. There's some studies that show we have enough food, if everyone, say, was vegan, to feed around 14 billion people. We're raising to around 9 billion to feed 14 billion people. But the way we're at now, we need around 2.5 planets to feed, to sustain this meat and dairy addiction that this planet's on now.
Well, you also raise the issue of hunger, which is endemic in huge parts of the globe, and how an assault against the animal agriculture industry and the switching to a vegan diet makes it possible to feed people who are not being fed.
That's it. I mean, the fact that we're feeding, 50% of the world's grain to non-human animals is an atrocity when you think about 700 million humans going hungry every single day, not being able to meet their caloric needs. I mean, you can also look at just the economic impact of it too. During the famine in Ethiopia in the 90s, where their population was literally starving to death, they were still exporting grain to feed European cattle. So there's a huge implication for humanity as well, and we have to consider the fact that, close to 1 billion people are hungry every single day, and that we can't allocate resources to feed non-human animals. It's completely inefficient.
We won't get into the health issue, but they're there. I mean, higher cancer rates, cholesterol, heart disease. This all comes from the heavy consumption of animal products. The whole sort of notion that we need protein from animal products is a fiction. And yet, this is a message that has been effectively stifled by the animal agriculture industry, and I think even when you attempted to make this film, you lost your funder over this issue. Was that correct?
Oh, we did. It's a very controversial subject. The part of it, it turned out multiple people lost our funding. It was one group was going to fund us, they didn't want to, and then it happened again. A few after they actually saw the film, saw how powerful and how much the message needs to be out there. They actually helped in the long run, but at the time it's just so controversial on so many different levels of them being attached to it. Same reason why the Greenpeaces and the Sierra Clubs and Amazon Watch, to be associated with something that might be a detriment to them. As we say, some people and groups are more concerned about the sustainability of themselves over the planet or profits over.
Did they react to the film, any of the big green groups that you profiled?
They did. Greenpeace wrote a pretty weak editorial on it. Sierra Club directly acknowledged it and said that the answer, Cowspiracy is true, but the answer is to eat grass-fed beef. we have this huge section on it, it's so terrible. So they've done it in different ways. Rainforest Action Network, which is probably the biggest win so far, they actually have a whole section on their website about meat consumption and how it affects the rainforest. So it's a start. And it's happening. It's still in its infancy. Cowspiracy has only been on Netflix for a while, but it's just getting talked about. I was at COP21 in Paris, and the buzz was the film and this information about climate change that was not being talked about inside the rooms, but outside the rooms, everyone was saying, finally, this is the first time it's really getting talked about.
Well, I found when I watched the film, I was, because I write about corporate power and corporate oppression, and I walked out of the film and told Eunice that this was a huge piece of the puzzle that I'd missed in terms of the exploitation by massive corporations that control what we eat and that poison the planet and even poison the consumers of these products. And we don't hear it. It has so effectively been banished from public discussion. Even more than, perhaps any other issue. I mean, certainly people are aware of the fossil fuel industry, but I think there is a complete silence and ignorance that's been imposed.
There is, and the thing is with the fossil fuel, that affects the climate change more than anything, but people sometimes really get sidetracked or focused on just the climate change part, where even if we somehow solve this climate change issue, you still have the water depletion, the water pollution, the ocean dead zones, the rainforest destruction. So you cure that, you still have all this that this one industry is doing. So fossil fuels is one thing, you know, this and this, but this is a one-stop that's killing on every level. And like you said, it's the biggest and most urgent secret that finally, thank goodness, is getting out. But
well, it's also, people ask, what can you do? And I think you talked earlier about, you know, limiting showers and this kind of stuff. The biggest contribution that any of us can make for our children and for future generations, and we can begin now, is to adopt a vegan diet. It is, you know, I think arguably one of the most important ethical choices that those of us who care about sustaining the planet can make.
And it's just, like you said, sustaining your health as well. You know, especially if you're a parent, you want to see grandkids someday. You know, the information is being hidden against the environment. The same thing is happening with health, and that's soon coming out too. So it sustains not only the planet, but your family and your own health. And you said ethics. Imagine the ripple of, say, visualizing a vegan world and the peace that comes from the ripple effect that is created all the way down from top to bottom. I mean, it's amazing just to imagine.
Great. Well, thank you, Kip and Keegan. And thank you for watching Days of Revolt.
Had to eat out the watermelon patch. And you know they put me in a shack